Hello, y'all. My name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. This is a live broadcast, and I am going to be sharing with you another work that is a book by Dr. John Coleman, who at one time worked for Tavistock, and then he came to the realization he needed to explain the truth and what was going on. And the name of this book, I've already done a couple of chapters in it, is The Committee of 300. Um, So what I'm going to do is be reading some of that tonight. I wanted to, basically, I'm reading this for people out there who are not able to buy the book because most of these books are no longer in print. And if they are some books out there, they're going to cost you a lot of money. And most people don't have $100 to $200 just to throw, money wise to buy one book. You see, it would be nice that in the future that they would be reprinted. I don't know if that'll ever happen. Some books of Eustace Mullins has been reprinted, but as far as I know, Dr. John Coleman's books have not been reprinted. Someone asked me a question if Dr. John Coleman was alive or not. Guys, I don't know. I have no idea. I wonder if he's in hiding, but I don't know. I looked up his name on the internet, but there's no sources saying he's alive or well or whatever. So we're just going to have to go with what we know. So his wishes, I don't know. So I'm going to be reading from the Committee of 300 here tonight. So here we go. We're starting at page 76 of 252. So again, this is what we call, I'm trying to think of the name of the group. This is a group of people who have been in power for quite a while. So it says, a woman who has been through a series of marriages gets national covers. One filthy, half-washed, drug-ridden, decadent rock band after another has hours of airtime devoted to its inane sounds and mad gyrations, clothes, fashions, and language aberrations, soap opera showing as near as damn it is to wearing pornography scenes drawn no comment. Whereas in early 1960s this would never have been tolerated. Today is accepted as normal. We have been subjected and we have succumbed to what Tavistock Institute calls future shocks, whose future is now, and we are so numbed by our cultural shock after another that to protest seems like a futile gesture. Yes, that is correct. That's completely correct. And therefore, logically, we think it does no good to protest. So we are defeated. That's my emphasis in what I'm saying. We're defeated. In 1986, the Committee of 300 ordered the pressure turned up. That is, the U.S. was not going down fast enough. So the United States began the process of recognizing the butchers of Cambodia, the criminal Pol Pot regime, self-professors to the murder of 2 million Cambodian citizens. In 1991, the wheel turned to full circle. The United States went to war against a friendly nation that had been programmed to trust the Washington traitors. We accused President Hussein of the small nation of Iraq of all manner of evil, none of which was even remotely true. We killed and maimed its children. We left them to starve and to die of all manner of diseases. In the same breath, we sent the Bush emissaries of the Committee of 300 to Cambodia to recognize the evil mass murderers 2 million of the 2 million Cambodians who were sacrificed by the Committee of 300 depopulation of cities experiment, which the big cities in the United States will experience in a not too distant future. That's going to start occurring, folks. I hate to say that. I don't want to see this. If you live in cities, you really need to move out. You really do. They're just like forts, and the problem is simply is that they make you think the forts are to prevent people from coming in, but in reality, they're going to prevent you from getting out, just like a prison. Now, President Bush and his Committee of 300 ridden administrators said, in effect, look, people, what do you want from me? I told you that I would compromise where I see fit, even when that means sleeping with Pol Pot's murderers. So what? Kiss my hips. The level of pressure for change will reach its peak in 1993, and we shall witness scenes such as we would never have thought possible. Punch-drunk America will react, but ever so slightly. Not even the latest threat to our freedom, the personal computer card, disturbs us. Willis Harman changing images of man would have been too technical for most to the service of Maryland Ferguson was attained to make it more easily understood. The Age of Aquarius. We're gonna read that book, hopefully, in the near future. So I just thought I'd tell you that. Heralded nude stage shows and a song which made the top of the charts. The dawning of the Age of Aquarius swept the globe. Personal computer card, which is when fully distributed, would deprive us of our familiar environment, and we shall see the environment means a lot more than the usual accepted meanings of the word. The United States has gone through a period of intense trauma such as it has never been visited on any other nation in the history of the world, and the worst is yet to come. Everything is going according to what Tavistock ordered and what the social scientists at Stanford mapped out. Times do not change, they are made to change. All changes are pre-planned and come as a result of careful action. We have been changed gradually at first, but now the pace of change is picking up. This is based upon 1990s, folks. This is 30 years later. We're 30 years after this, okay? And the change is rapid now. They're pushing it very fast. We have been changed gradually at first, but now the pace of changing is picking up. The United States is being transformed from one nation under God to a polyglot of nations under servant gods, of several gods. The U.S. is no longer one nation under God. The framers of the Constitution have lost the battle. Our forebears spoke a common language and believed in a common religion, Christianity, and held common ideas. There were no aliens in our midst that came later in the deliberate planning attempt to break up the United States in a series of fragmented nationalities, cultures, and beliefs. If you doubt this, go down to the east side of New York or the west side of Los Angeles or any given Saturday and look around you. The United States has become several nations struggling to coexist under a common system of government. When the floodgates of immigration were opened wide by Franklin D. Roosevelt, a cousin of the head of Committee of 300, the culture shock caused great confusion and dislocation and made one nation an unworkable concept. The Club of Rome and NATO have exacerbated the situation. Love thy neighbor is an idea that will not work unless your neighbor is as yourself. To the framers of our Constitution, the truths they had laid out for future generations were self-evident. To themselves, being unsure that future generations would also find the truths to which they bound this nation self-evident. They set about spelling them out. It seems that they were afraid of a time that might come when the truths that they espoused would no longer be self-evident. The Tavistock Institute for Human Relations has made sure that what the framers feared might come to pass has indeed come to pass. That time has arrived with Bush and his no absolutes and his new world order under the Committee of 300. This is a part of the concept of social changes forced upon America, which Harmon, Harmon, and the Club of Rome said would make for severe trauma and a great building up of pressure. The social upheavals that have taken place since the advent of Tavistock. The Club of Rome and NATO will continue in the U.S. for as long as the limit of absorption is ignored. Nations are made of individuals, and like individuals, there is a limit to their ability to absorb changes, no matter how robust they may be. The psychological truth was well proven by the Strategic Bombing Survey, which called for saturation bombing of German worker housings. As mentioned earlier, the project was the work of the Prudential Insurance Company. Do you hear that? Prudential Insurance Company, and no one doubts today that Germany suffered its defeat because of this operation. Many of the scientists who work on that project are working on the saturated bombing of America, or else they have passed on, leaving their skill techniques in the hands of others who follow behind them. The legacy they left behind them can be found in the fact that we have not so much lost our way as a nation, but that we have been steered in a direction opposite to that which the framers of the Declaration guided us for over 200 years. We have in short lost contact with our historical genes, our faiths, which inspired countless generations of Americans to move forward as a nation, benefiting from the patrimony left to us by the framers of the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution. That we are lost is clear to all who seek the truth, as unpleasant as it may be. With President Bush and his no absolute morals guiding us, we blunder ahead as lost nations and individuals tend to do. We are collaborating with the Committee of 300 for our own downfall and our own enslavement. Some sense it and feel a strong sense of unease. The various conspiracy theories they are familiar with do not seem to cover it all. This is because they know nothing of the conspiracy hierarchy, that is, the Committee of 300. These souls who feel a deep sense of unease and that something is radically wrong, yet cannot put their collective fingers on the problem, walk in darkness. They look to the future they see slipping away from them. Yeah, do you see it slipping away now, folks? It's happening right before your eyes. Since 2020, it's been rapidly going. There is no COVID-19, never was, but they used it, you see. PSYOP, tremendous PSYOP upon the people. The American dream has become a mirage. They place their faith in religion but take no steps to help that faith along by action. Americans will never experience a tracing of steps such as the Europeans experienced when at the height of the Dark Ages. By determined action, they awoke in themselves a spirit of renewal which resulted in a glorious renaissance. The enemy that has directed them to this point decided to make a strong move against the United States in 1980. So that renaissance of America would be impossible. Who is the enemy? The enemy is a no faceless they. The enemy is clearly identifiable as the Committee of 300, the Club of Rome, NATO, and all of its affiliation organizations, the think tanks, the research institutions controlled by Tavistock. There's no need to use they or the enemy, except as shorthand. We know who the enemy is. The Committee of 300 with its Eastern liberal establishment aristocrats, its banks, its insurance companies, giant corporations, foundations, communication networks preside over by the hierarchy of conspiracy. This is the enemy. This is the power that brought to life the reign of terror in Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution, World War I and II, Korea, the Vietnam War, the fall of Rhodesia in South Africa, and Nicaragua and the Philippines. This is a secret upper level government that brought into existence the controlled disintegration of the U.S. economy and deindustrialization, what was once the greatest industrial power for good that the world has ever known. America today can be compared with a soldier who falls asleep at the thick of battle. We Americans have fallen asleep, giving way to apathy caused by being confronted with a multiplicity of choices which have confused us. These are the changes that alter our environment, break down our resistance to change so that we become dazed, apathetic, that is apathy, and eventually fall asleep in the thick of battle. There is a technical term for this condition. It's called long-range penetration strain. The art of subjecting a very large group of people to continued long-range penetration strain was developed by scientists working at Tavistock Institute of Human Relations and their U.S. subsidies, being Stanford Research Institute and RAND Corporation, and at least another 150 research institutions here in the U.S. Dr. Kurt Lewin, the scientist who developed this fiendish warfare, has caused the average American patriot to fret over various conspiracy theories, leaving him or her with a feeling of uncertainty and insecurity, isolated and perhaps even afraid as he searches, but fails to understand the decay and rot caused by the changing image of mankind. Unable to identify or combat the social, moral, economic, and political changes he deems undesirable and does not want, yet which increase in intensity on every hand. Yeah, this is a battle, and I've compared this. I've done this before, but I want to illustrate again. Is we are being attacked as we would go back to the American Indians and the um, circle the wagon mentality. The problem simply is that we are being attacked at every angle, every point, and trying to hang on for supplies to come. But there's not going to be any supplies coming on. See, no one's going to save us. You see, all right. This is a brilliant plan they're doing. They want this country to fall, but they want this country to fall. They want every other country to fall too, you see. And most of them have fallen, okay? History's proven that. Dr. Lewin's name will not be found in any of our establishment history books, which in any event are a record of events mostly from the side of the ruling class or the victors of wars. And the winners always write the stories, folks. Therefore, it is with pride that I introduce his name to you. As mentioned before, Dr. Lewin organized the Harvard Psychological Clinic. and the Institute for Social Research under the auspices of the Tavistock Institute. The names do not give much indication of the purpose of the two organizations. This reminds me of the infamous bill to reform coinage and mint laws passed in 1827. The title of the bill was harmless enough or sounded harmless, which was the intention of its backers. Through this act, Senator John Sherman betrayed the nation in the hands of international bankers. Sherman allegedly sponsored the bill without reading it. As we know, the bill true's purpose was to demonize silver and give the thieving banks not demonize, I should say, silver and give the thieving bankers unlimited power over the credit of our nation, powers to which the bankers were clearly not entitled under the clear and unmistakable terms of the U.S. Constitution. Kurt Lewin gave the Tavistock Institute, the Club of Rome, and NATO unlimited power over America to which no organization, entity, or society is entitled. These institutions have used their usurpative power to destroy the will of the nation, to resist the plans and intentions of the conspirators, to rob us of the fruits of the American Revolution, and steer us on a course leading directly to a new dark age under a one world government. So here's some of the big names here, folks. Lewin's colleagues in this long-range penetration objective were Richard Crossman, Eric Trist, T-R-I-S-T, H.V. Dix, Willis Harman, Charles Anderson, Garner Lindsay, Richard Price, and W.R. Byron. Again, these names never appear in the evening news. In fact, they only appear in scientific journals, so very few people are aware of them. Not at all aware of what the men behind their names have done and are doing to the United States. President Jefferson once said he pitied those who thought they knew what was taking place through reading the newspapers. Disraeli, the British Prime Minister, said much the same thing. Indeed, down through the ages, rulers have delighted in running things from behind the scenes. Man has always felt the need to dominate, and nowhere at no time is desire more prevalent than in the modern age. Is were not so, why all the need for secret societies? Correct. Why are there needs for secret societies? Let's see. If we are ruled by an open system run by democratic elected officers, why the need for secret Masonic orders in every village, town, and city across the United States? True. How is it that Freemasonry can operate so openly and yet keep its secrets so well hidden? We can't ask the 9 unknown men of the Nine Sisters Lodge in Paris that question, nor can we ask it of their 9 fellows in the Quatuor Coronatio Lodge in London. That's spelled C-O-R-O-N-A-T-I Lodge in London. Yet these 18 men form part of an even more secret government, the RIIA, and beyond that, the Committee of 300. How is it that the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry could brainwash John Hinckley to shoot President Reagan? Why do we have such secret orders as the Knight of St. John of Jerusalem, the Round Table, the Milner Group, and so on down the line upon line of secret societies? They form part of a worldwide chain of command and control running through the Club of Rome, NATO, and RIIA, and finally right up to the conspiracy hierarchy, the Committee of 300. Men need these secret societies because their deeds are evil and must be hidden. Evil cannot stand in the light of truth. In this book, we shall find an almost complete list of the conspirators, their institutions, fronts, and publications. In 1980, the Aquarian conspiracy was in full swing, and its success can be seen in every facet of our private and national lives. The overwhelming rise in mindless violence, serial killers, teenage suicides, the unmistakable sign of lethargy, long-range penetration is part of our new environment, as dangerous, if not more so, than the polluted air that we breathe. The coming of the age of Aquarius called America totally unprepared. We as a nation were not prepared for the changes about to be forced upon us. Whoever had heard of Tavistock, Kurt Lewin, Willis Harman, and John Rawlins Reese? They were not even on the American political scene. What we would have noticed if we bothered to look at all was a falling off of our ability to withstand futuristic shock as we become more fatigued, distressed, and eventually enter a period of psychological shock, followed by widespread apathy as an outward manifestation of long-range penetration warfare. So this is the way you destroy a country. This is the way you do it from within. You don't have to even use the military for this purpose at all. See. The age of Aquarius was best described by Tavistock Institute as the vehicle for delivering turbulence. There are three distinct phases in this response and reaction to stress displayed by large social groups. First, there is superficiality. The population is under attack will defend itself with slogans. This does not identify the source of the crisis and therefore does nothing to address it. Hence, the crisis will persist. Yes, I think that's correct. That is correct. The second is fragmentation. This occurs as the crisis continues and social order breaks down. Then there is the third phase where the population group goes into self-realization and turns away from the induced crisis, and there follows a maladapted response accompanied with active synonymous idealism and disassociation. Who can deny that with the huge increase in drug usage, crack making thousands of instant new addicts each day, the shocking rise in murder of infants each day, aborticide, which by now far exceeds casualties suffered by our armed forces in both not only world wars, Korea and Vietnam, the open acceptance of homosexual and lesbian, whose rights are protected by more and more laws each year, the terrible plague we call AIDS, washing over our own towns and cities, total failure of our education system, the stunning increase in the divorce rate, a murder rate that shocks the rest of the world into disbelief, satanic serial killing, the disappearance of thousands of young children, that is, children, folks, is unbelievable what's going. Snatched off our streets by perverts, a virtual tidal wave of pornography accompanied by promiscuousness on our television screen who can deny that this nation is in crisis, which we are not addressing and from which we are turning away. We're pretending it'll go away. It's not going away, folks. Well-meaning people who specialize in these things blame a lot of the problem of education on what passes for in the United States. Criminals now abound as the age 9, groups of 9 to 15. Rapists are quite commonly as young as 10. And we just, this is amazing. Anyway, let me continue. Our social specialists, our teachers union, our churches say it's all due to a faulty educational system. Witness how test scores keep dropping. The specialists bewail the fact that the United States now ranks around 39th now in the level of education in the world. My, have we fallen. We surely have. Why do we bemoan what is so obvious? Our education system was programmed to self-destruct. That was what Dr. Alexander King was sent here by NATO to arrange. This is what Justice Hugo Black was ordered to arrange. The fact is the Committee of 300, with the approval of our government, does not want our youth to be properly educated. The education that Freemasonry Justice Hugo Black, or Alexander King, or Gunnar Menard and his wife came to give the children of the United States is that crime pays, expediency is what counts. They taught our children that United States law is unequally applied and that is perfectly in order. Our children were properly educated by a decade of corrupt examples, one being Ronald Reagan, the other being George Bush, were ruled by greed and become totally corrupted by it. Our education system hasn't failed under the guidance of King, Black, and the Miradas. It is actually a great success, but it all depends from whose point of view we'll look at it. The Committee of 300 is delighted with our education system and will not allow one comma of it to be changed. According to Stanford and Willis Harman, the induced trauma of a long-range penetration of which our education in part has been going on for 45 years, ever since after the World War II. Yet how many are aware of the insidious pressures being applied to our society and the constant exposure to brainwash that goes on every day? The mysterious gang wars that broke out in New York in the 1950s is an example of how the conspirators can create and stage manage any type of disruptive element they like. Where those gang wars came from, nobody knew until the 1980s when researchers uncovered the hidden controllers who direct the so-called social phenomenon. Gang wars were carefully planned at Stanford, deliberately designed to shock society and cause ripples of disturbance. You heard that, at Stanford. These schools need to be shut down, folks, okay? They really do. They're making money by destroying this country. We've got some very corrupt people at the top. By 1958, there were in excess of 200 of these gangs. They were made popular by a musical and Hollywood movie called West Side Story. After making the news for a decade, suddenly in 1966, they disappeared off the streets of New York, Los Angeles, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Chicago. Throughout the near decade of gang violence, the public reacted according to the profile response Stanford expected. Society as a whole could not comprehend gang warfare, and the public responded in a maladaptive manner. Had there been those wise enough to recognize in gang wars a Stanford experiment in social engineering and brainwashing, the conspirators' plot would have been exposed. Either we did not have trained specialists who could see what was going on, which is highly unlikely, or else they were threatened and remained silent. The cooperation with Stanford by the news media brought to light a new age attack on our environment, just as predicted by the social engineers and the new science sentinels at Tavistock. New scientists at Tavistock. In 1989, gang warfare as a social conditioning to change was reintroduced to the streets of Los Angeles. Within a few short months of the first incident, gangs began to proliferate first in the scores, then the hundreds on the streets of the east side of Los Angeles. Crack houses and rampant prostitution proliferated. Drug dealers dominated the streets. Anybody who got in their way was gunned down. The outcry in the press was loud and long. Stanford targeted large population groups began defending itself with slogans. This is what Tavistock calls the first phrase, with the targeted group failing to identify the source of the crisis. You see what they do. We're already on the wrong peg, you see. People start slogans, but they haven't identified the real enemy. You see. The second phrase of the gang war crisis was fragmentation. People not living in the areas frequented by gangs said, "Thank God they are not in our neighborhood." This ignores the fact that the crisis continues with or without recognition and that social order in Los Angeles has begun to break down. As profiled by Tavistock, those groups not affected by gang war broke away to defend themselves because the source of this crisis was not identified. The so-called maladaptation process, the period of disassociation. Apart from the proliferation of drug sales, what is the purpose of gang war? First, it is to show the target group that they are not safe. Insecurity is generated. Second, it is to show that organized society is helpless in the face of such violence. And thirdly, to bring about a recognition of the fact that our social order is collapsing. The present wave of gang violence will go away just as quick as it has started once the three phases of the Stanford program are completed. Outstanding example of social conditioning is to accept change even when it is recognized as an unwelcome change by the large population group in the site of Stanford Research Institute. Was the advent of the Beatles. The Beatles were brought to the United States as part of a social experiment which would subject large population groups to brainwashing which they were not even aware of. When Tavistock brought the Beatles to the United States, nobody could have imagined the cultic disaster that was to follow in their wake. The Beatles were an integral part of the Aquarian conspiracy, a living organization which sprang from the changing image of man, which is based upon URH/489-2150 Policy Research Report number 4474. Policy report prepared by the SRI Center for the Study of Social Policy, Director Professor Willis Harman. The phenomenon of the Beatles was not a spontaneous rebellion by youth against the old social system. Instead, it was a carefully crafted plot to introduce by a conspirator body which could not be identified, a highly destructive and divisive element into large population groups targeted for change against its will. New words and new phrases prepared by Tavistock were introduced in America, along with the Beatles. Words such as rock in relation to music sound, teenager, cool, discovered, and pop music were a lexicon of disguised code words significant the acceptance of drugs and arrival with and accompanied the Beatles wherever they went, to be discovered by teenagers. Incidentally, the word teenagers was never used until just before the Beatles' arrival on the scene, courtesy of the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations. As in the case of gang wars, nothing could or would have been accomplished without the cooperation of the media, especially electronic media. In fact, and in particular, the scrupulous Ed Sullivan, who had been coached by the conspirators as to the role he was to play. It is very interesting about him, isn't it? That he was the one who got the Beatles to play there and other bands to participate in that on a Sunday evening. It was the prime time. Nobody would have paid much attention to the motley crew from Liverpool and the 12 atonal system of atonal system of music that was to follow had it not been for an overabundance of press exposure. The 12 atonal system consisted of heavy, repetitive sounds taken from the music of the cult Dionysius and the Baal priesthood by Adorno, and given a modern flavor by this special friend of the Queen of England, and hence the Committee of 300. Tavistock and the Stanford Research Center created trigger words, which then came into general usage around rock music and its fans. Trigger words created a distinct new breakaway, largely young population group, which was persuaded by social engineering conditions to believe that the Beatles really were their favorite group. All trigger words devised in the context of rock music were designed for mass control of the new target group, the youth of America. The Beatles did a perfect job, or perhaps we should say it would be more correct to say that Tavistock and Stanford did a perfect job. The Beatles merely reacting like trained robots with a little help from their friends. Code words for using drugs and making it cool. The Beatles became a highly visible new type, that is, more Tavistock jargon, and as such, it was not long before the group made new styles, that is, the fads in clothing, hairstyles, and the language uses, which upset the older generation, as was intended. This is part of the fragmentation maladaptation process worked out by Willis Harman and his team of social scientists and genetic engineering tinkers and put into action. The role of this print and electronic media in our society is crucial to the success of brainwashing large population groups. Gang wars ended in Los Angeles in 1966 as the media withdrew its coverage. The same thing would happen with the current wave of gang wars in Los Angeles. See, this is all done by script, folks. This is what's going on. It's done by script. It's in a way, it's not natural. And what I'm saying simply is, if these gangs would have done this such and such, why the media was part of this. So they brought this into your television set. Oh my God, what is going on here? You see, and it would bring what they call the issue of fear. Why is this happening? Where's the police? We need more policemen. You see, that's the other key, part of the Hegelian dialectic. You see, the same thing would happen with the current way of gang wars in Los Angeles. Street gangs would wither on the vine once media saturation coverage toned down and then completely withdraw. As in 1966, the issue would become burned out. Street gangs would have served their purpose of creating turbulence and insecurity. Exactly the same pattern will be followed in the case of rock music. Deprived of media attention, it will eventually take its place in history. You see, following the Beatles, who incidentally were put together by the Tavistock Institute, came other made in England rock groups who, like the Beatles, had Theodore Adorno write their cult literates and compose all their music. I hate to use these beautiful words in the context of Beatlemania. It reminds me of how wrongly the word lover is used when referring to the filthy interaction between two homosexuals reveling in pig's will. To call rock music is insult, likewise the language used in rock lyrics. Tavistock and Stanford Research then embarked on the second phase of the work commissioned by the Committee of 300. This youth phrase turned up the heat for the social change in America. As quickly as the Beatles had appeared on the American scene, so too did the best generation, trigger words designed to separate and fragment society. The media now focuses its attention on the beat generation. Others Tavistock or coin words came seemingly out of nowhere. Beatniks, hippies, flower children became part of the vocabulary of America. It became popular to drop out and wear dirty jeans, go about with long unwashed hair. The beat generation cut itself off from mainstream America. It became just as infamous as the cleaner Beatles before them. So see what you're seeing here is a drama. It's a plan in a way to gradually lead you in what they want you to be. That is the young people. And with this destruction of the country, and also creating a market that is the market of people who use drugs, who have to have drugs. And so now dependent upon those drugs to just get up and just look at the streets of Philadelphia, folks. Go there, not go there, but look at the streets. There are videos of what goes on in Philadelphia. People are on the streets. Um, they're defeated. They're destroyed. You see, they have no hope. They've given up. And this is what they do because they change the jargon. They change the music probably I see it every 10 years. It's meant to alienate certain groups, you see, and it's also meant to simply, hey, this is our music. We're going to change the world, you see. But nothing changes, you see. It just gets worse. Well, I shouldn't say nothing changes. It actually gets worse. So the newly created group and its lifestyle swept millions of young Americans into the cult. American youth underwent a radical revolution without ever being aware of it, while the older generation stood by helplessly, unable to identify the source of the crisis and thus reacting in maladaptive manner against its manifestations, which were drugs of all types, marijuana and later lysergic acid, that is LSD, so conveniently provided for them by their Swiss pharmaceutical company called Sandoz. Did you know that? Sandoz, Sandoz, which is, I don't know if it's still in existence or not. I think they were bought out. Don't know for sure. Following discovery by one of its chemists, Albert Hofmann, how to make synthetic ergotamine, I spell that to you, Ergotamine, a powerful mind-altering drug. The Committee of 300 financed the project through one of their banks, which was part of S.C. Warburg, and the drug was carried to America by the philosopher Aldous Huxley. The new wonder drug was promptly distributed in sample-sized packages handed out free of charge on college campuses across the United States or at rock concerts, which became the leading vehicle for proliferation of the use of drugs. The question that cries out for answers: what was the DEA doing at this time? There's compelling circumstantial evidence that would appear to indicate the DEA knew what was going on, but was ordered not to take any action. With very substantial numbers of new British rock bands arriving in the United States, rock concerts began to become a fixation on the social calendar of American youth. In tandem with these concerts, the use of drugs among the youth rose in proportion. The devilish bedlam of discordant heavy beat sounds numbed the minds of listeners so that they were easily persuaded to try the new drug on the basis that everybody else is doing it. Peer pressure is a very strong weapon, folks. The new culture received maximum coverage from the jackal media, which cost the conspirators or aspirers not one single thin dime. Great anger was felt by the number of civil leaders and churchmen over the new cult, but their energies were misdirected against the result of what was going on and not against the cause. Critics of the rock cult made the same mistakes that had been made in the Prohibition era. They criticized law enforcement agencies, teachers, parents, anybody but the conspirators. Because of the anger and resentment I feel towards the great drug plague, I make no apology for using language which is not customary for me to use. One of the worst drug slobs ever to walk the streets of America was Allen Ginsberg. This Ginsberg pushed the use of LSD through advertising, which cost him nothing, although under normal circumstances it would have cost millions of dollars in TV advertisement revenue. This free advertisement for drugs and LSD in particular reached a new high in the late 1960s, thanks to the ever-willing cooperation of the media. The effort of Allen Ginsberg mass advertising campaign was devastating. The American public was subjected to one cultural future shock after another in rapid succession. We became overexposed and overstimulated, and again, may I remind you that this is Tavistock jargon, lifted from Tavistock's training manual. Overwhelmed by its new development, and when we reached that point, our minds began to lapse into apathy. It was just too much to cope with, that is to say. Long-range penetration had taken hold of us. Ginsberg claimed to be a poet, but no greater rubbish was ever written by anyone who ever aspired to become a poet. Ginsberg's designated task had little to do with poetry, folks. His main function was to push the new subculture and force acceptance of it upon the large targeted population group. To assist him in his task, Ginsberg co-opted the services of Norman Mailer, M-A-I-L-E-R, a writer of sorts who had spent some time in the mental institution. Mailer was a favorite of the left-wing Hollywood crowd, and so had no problem with getting maximum television time for Ginsberg. Naturally, Mailer had to have a pretext. Not even he could blatantly come out with the true nature of Ginsberg's television appearance. So a charade was adopted. Mailer would talk seriously on camera with Ginsberg about poetry and literature. The method of getting wide television coverage at no cost to themselves was followed by every rock group and concert promoter who followed the example set by Ginsberg. The electronic media moguls had big hearts when it came to giving free time to these dirty, venomous creatures and their even dirtier products and filthy ideas. Their promotion of horrible garbage spoken volumes without abundant help from the print and electronic media, the drug trade could not have spread as rapidly as it did in the late 60s and early 70s. And probably would have been confined to a few small local areas. Ginsberg was able to give several national television performances extolling the virtues of LSD and marijuana, under the guise of new ideas and new cultures, developing in the art and music world, not to be outdone by the electronic media. Ginsberg's admirers wrote glowing articles about this colorful man in the art and social columns of all the American largest newspapers and magazines. There had never been such a across the media board-free advertising campaign in the history of newspaper, radio, and television as cost to promoters of the Aquarian conspiracy, NATO, and the Club of Rome. Not one red cent. It was all of absolutely free advertising for LSD, only thinly disguised as art and culture. One of Ginsberg's closest friends, Kenny Love, published a 5-page report in the New York Times. This is according with the methodology used by Tavistock and Stanford Research. If something is to be promoted, which the public has not yet been fully brainwashed to accept, then have someone write an article covering all sides of the subject matter. The other method is to have a television talk show in which a panel of experts promote the product and are ideal under the pretext of discussing it. There are point and counterpoint, both pro and con participants airing their support or opposition. When it is all over, the subject to be promoted has been denned into the public mind. While this was new in the early 1970s, today is standard practice on which talk shows thrive. Love's 5-page pro-LSD, pro-Ginsberg articles were duly printed by the New York Times, and Ginsberg tried to buy that same amount of space in advertising would have cost him at least $50,000. But Ginsberg didn't have to worry thanks to friend Kenny Love. Ginsberg got a massive advertising all for free with newspapers like the New York Times, the Washington Post under control of the Committee of 300. This kind of free advertisement is given to any subject matter and more especially to those promoting decadent lifestyles, drugged hedonism, anything that would confuse the American people. After the trial run with Ginsberg and LSD, it became standard Club of Rome practice to call upon major newspapers in America to give free advertising on demand to people and ideas that they were promoting. Worse yet, or better yet, depending upon the viewpoint, United Press picked up Kenny Love's free advertising for Ginsberg and LSD and telexed it to hundreds of newspapers and magazines around the country under the guise of news stories. Even such highly respectable establishment magazines as Harper's Bazaar and Time made Mr. Ginsberg respectable. If a nationwide campaign of this magnitude were presented to Ginsberg and the promoters of LSD by an advertising agency, the price tag would have run at least $1 million in terms of $1970. Today, that price tag would be more than less, more around $15 to $16 million. It is no wonder that I refer to the news media as jackals. I suggested we try to find any media outlet to do a expose on the Federal Reserve Board, which is what I did. I took my article, which was a good expose of the greatest swindle on earth, which it is, to every major newspaper and radio and television station, magazine house, and several talk show hosts A few made promises that sounded good. They would definitely air the article and have me discuss it. Give them about a week and they would get back to me. Not one of them ever did, nor did my article ever appear in the pages of their newspaper or journals, because it's all being script, folks. The people who speak out against anything that's wrong are not going, are either going to be made fun of or it's going to be ignored. It was as if a blanket of silence had been thrown over me and the subject I was endeavoring to promote. Indeed, that was precisely what had happened. Without massive media hype and without almost around-the-clock covers, the hippie beatnik rock drug cult would never have gotten off the ground. It would have remained a localized oddity. The Beatles, with their twangling guitars, silly expressions, drug language, and weird clothes, would not have amounted to a hill of beans. Instead, because the Beatles were given saturation covers by the media, the United States has suffered one cultural shock after another. The men buried in the think tanks and research institutions, whose names and faces are still not known to but a few people, made sure that the press played its part. Conversely, the media important role in not exposing the power behind the future cultural shocks made certain that the source of this crisis was never identified. Thus was our society driven mad through psychological shocks and stress. Driven mad is taken from Tavistock's training manual. From its modest beginning in 1921, Tavistock was ready in 1966 to launch a major irreversible cultural revolution in America, which has not yet ended. The Aquarian conspiracy is part of it. Thus, softening up our nation was now deemed right for the introduction of drugs, which was to rival the Prohibition era in scope and huge amounts of money to be made. This, too, was an intricate part of the Aquarian conspiracy. The proliferation of drug uses was one of the subjects under study at the Science Policy Research Union at Tavistock, Sussex University facility. It was known as the Future Shock Center, a title given to so-called future-oriented psychology designed to manipulate whole population groups to induce future shocks. It was the first of several such institutions set up by Tavistock. Yeah, there's I'm thinking of this particular guy. There's a book that was put out, and I think real quick here. Yeah, this was done by a guy named Alvin Toffler, T-O-R, called Future Shock. And then there's another one called A Power Ship he's written out. So that's part of the whole deal here. This was all part of the plan. Alvin Toffler, Futurology books. So these books, you see, this is all controlled and this is completely controlled here. You can see what's going on. People will be aware of it. You see. Continue. Future shocks is described as a series of events which come in so fast that the human brain cannot absorb the information. As I said earlier, science has shown that there are clearly marked limits to the amount of changes in nature of them that the mind can deal with. After continuous shocks, the large target population group discovers that it does not want to make choices anymore. Apathy takes over, often preceded by mindless violence, such as the characteristic of the Los Angeles street gangs, serial killers, rapists, and child kidnappers. Such a group becomes easy to control and with docility will follow orders without rebelling, which is the object of the exercise. The whole idea is what they're doing. Is that people get so frustrated, can't handle it, and they just quit. They don't fight anymore. They don't stand against evil, you see. And that's what we have. That's what we have already, you see. There are people who still are fighting out there, okay, but they're limited by the media, you see. The media doesn't want them to get this publicized because they're controlled. Future shock, says SPRU, is defined as physical and psychological distress arising from the excess load on the decision-making mechanism of the human mind. That is Tavistock's jargon, lifted straight from Tavistock manual, which they don't know I have, you see. Just as an overload electrical circuit will activate a trip switch, so do humans trip out, which is a syndrome that medical science is only now beginning to understand. although John Rollins Rees conducted experiments in this field as far back as the 1920s. And can it be appreciated such a target group is ready to trip out and take to drugs as a means of escape from the pressures of so many choices having to be made? They knew this. This is how drug usage was spread so rapidly through American Beat generation. What started with the Beatles and sample packages of LSD had grown into a flood tide of drug usage, which is swamping America. And this is what they want. They don't want people to be aware. They want people to be under the sedition of, under the saturation of drugs. And with that, they're controlled. They never ask any questions, what's going on, nothing of that nature. It's about making money, folks. It's another thing, while destroying the country. The drug trade is controlled by the Committee of 300 from the top down. The drug trade started with the British East India Company and was closely followed by the Dutch East India Company. Both were controlled by a council of 300. Listen to the name of the members and stockholders of the BEIC, read like something out of, I don't know who this is, Debrett's Peerage. BEIC established the China Inland Mission, whose job it was to get the Chinese peasants, or coolies as they were called, addicted to opium. They created the market for opium, which the BEIC then filled. In much the same way, the Committee of 300 used the Beatles to popularize social drugs with the youth of America and the Hollywood in crowd. Ed Sullivan was sent to England to become acquainted with the first Tavistock Institute rock group. To hit the shores of the United States, Sullivan then returned to the United States to draft a strategy for electronic media on how to package and sell the group. Without the full cooperation of electronic media, and Ed Sullivan in particular, the Beatles and their music would have died on the vine. Instead, our nation's life and the character of the United States was forever changed. Now that we know, it is all too clear how successful the Beatles' campaign to proliferate the use of drugs became. The fact that the Beatles had their music and lyrics written for them by Theo Adorno was concealed from public view. The prime function to the Beatles was to be discovered by teenagers who, when they subjected to a nonstop barrage of Beatles music until they become convinced that they liked the sound and adopted it, along with all that accompanied it. The Liverpool group performed up to expectations with a little help from their friends, that is, i.e., illegal substance we call drugs, created a whole new class to young Americans in the precise mode ordained by the Tavistock Institution. This is, I want you to understand this. Let's continue on. Tavistock had created a highly visible new type to act as their drug runners. The China Inland Missions, Christian missionaries, would not have fitted in with the 1960s new type in social scientist jargon. What it meant was that the Beatles created new social patterns, first and foremost being to normalize and popularize the use of drugs, new tastes of clothes, and hairstyles, which really distinguished them from the older generation. Excuse me. That's what's intended by Tavistock. Yeah, so to bend the divide. It's part of the division also. It is important to note the deliberate fragmentation in introducing language used by Tavistock. The teenagers never once dreamed that all the different things that they aspired to were the products of older scientists working in think tanks in England and Stanford research. How mortified they would have been if they had discovered that most of their cool habits and expressions were deliberately created for their use by a group of older social science scientists. The role of the media was and remains very important in promoting the use of drugs on a nationwide scale. When coverage of the street warfare games were abruptly terminated by the media, they became burned out as a social phenomenon. The new age of drugs followed. The media has always served as a catalyst and has always pushed new causes. And now media attention was focused on the drug uses and its supporters, the Beat generation. Yet another phase fashioned at Tavistock. Its determined efforts to bring about social change in the United States. Drug usage now becomes an accepted part of everyday life in America. This Tavistock design program took in millions of American youth, and the older generation began to believe that America was undergoing a natural social revolution. Failing all the while to realize that what was happening to their children was not a spontaneous movement, but a highly artificial creation designed to force change in America's social and political lives. The descendants of the British East India Company were delighted with the success of their drug pushing program. Their disciples became adept in the use of LSD so conveniently made available by patrons of the drug trade like Aldous Huxley, courtesy of the highly respected Sandoz Company of Switzerland and financed by the great Warburg banking dynasty. The new wonder drug was primarily distributed at all rock concerts and on college campuses in free sample packages. The question that begs to be asked is, what was the FBI doing while all this was going on? The purpose of the Beatles has become abundantly clear. The British East India Company, descendants in the upper class society in London, must have felt very good about the billions of dollars they began rolling in. With the coming of rock, which shall henceforth be used as a shorthand to describe Adorno's Finnish satanic music, he would call it, a tremendous increase in the use of social drugs, especially marijuana, was observed. The entire dope business was expanded under the control and direction of the Science Policy Research Institute. The SPRU was run by Leonard Bradford, Kenneth Dam, and Ronald Lippard, under whose expert guidance a large number of new scientists were trained to promote future shocks, one of the chief being the dramatic increase in the use of drugs by American teenagers. SPRU policy papers planted in various government agencies, including the Drug Enforcement Agency, dictated the course of the disastrous drug war allegedly waged by Reagan and the Bush administration. This was the forerunner of how the United States is run today, by one committee or council after another, by intergovernment fed on Haverstadt's papers, which they firmly believe are their own opinions. They've been brainwashed. These virtual unknowns are making decisions that will forever change our form of government and the quality of life here in the United States. Through crisis adaptations, we have already been changed so much as to barely compare with what was in the 1950s. Also, our environment has been changed. There is much talk about environment these days, while it mostly refers to green surrounding, pure rivers, and fresh air. There's another equally important environment, namely the drug environment. The environment of our lifestyle has become polluted. Our thinking has become polluted. And our ability to control our destiny has become polluted. We are confronted by changes that pollute our thinking to the extent that we do not know what to make of it all. The environment of change is crippling the nation. We appear to have so little control that it has produced anxiety and confusion. We now look to the group solutions instead of individual solutions to our problems. You see, wow. We do not make use of our own resources to solve problems. In this, the prolific rise in drug use is playing a leading role. The strategy is a deliberate one, devised by new scientists, the social engineers, and tinkerers, aimed at the most vulnerable of all areas, our self-image, or how we perceive ourselves, which leads us eventually to become like sheep, being led to the slaughter. We become confused by the many choices we have to make, and we have become apathetic. We are manipulated by unscrupulous men without ever being aware of it. This is particularly true of the drug trade, and we are now in the transition stage where we can be set up for a change from the present constitutional form of government, which has taken a giant step forward under the Bush administration. While there are those who still persist in the face of all of the evidence to the contrary, saying it can't happen in America, the fact is it has already happened. Our will to resist events not to our liking has been steadily eroded and undermined. We will resist, some of us say, but not so many of us will do that, and we will be in the minority. The drug trade has essentially changed our environment. The alleged war on drugs is a farce. It does not exist in quantitative measure to make the slightest difference to the descendants of the British East India Company. Combined with computerization, we are almost fully brainwashed, robbed of our ability to resist forced changes, which brings us to another environment, people control. also known as personal information control, without which governments cannot play their numbers game. As matters stand, we, the people, have absolutely no way of knowing just what government does or does not know about us. Government computer files are not subject to scrutiny by the public at large. Do we foolishly believe that personal information is kept? Remember, in every society, there are rich and powerful families who control law enforcement agencies. I have proven the existence of families. Do not think that if these families wanted to find out about us, they could not do so. These are the families who often have members of a committee of 300. I have to stop here a little bit. Take Kistner, for example, who has his own private dossier of hundreds of thousands of people, not only in the United States, but all over the world. Are we on the Kistner enemy list? Is this far-fetched? Not at all. Take P2 Masonic and Committee Monte Carlo, who has such lists which run into tens of thousands of names. Incidentally, Kennedy is one of them. There are other private intelligence agents, such as Intel, whom we shall meet later. One of the ways heroin is moved into Europe is through the Principality of Monaco. The heroin comes from Corsica, carried in ferries that pile a busy trade between Corsica and Monte Carlo during the summer. There is no check of what goes on or comes off those ferries, as there is no border between France and Monaco. Drugs, and most especially heroin, partially processed opium, flows through the open border of Monaco into laboratories in France, or else it has already been processed into heroin. It goes directly to the distributors. The Ghermonti family has been in the drug smuggling business for centuries because Prince Rainier got greedy and began skimming heavily and would not desist after the 3 warnings. His wife, Princess Grace, was murdered in a car accident. Rainier underestimated the power of the committee in which he is a member. The Rover car in which she was traveling had the brake fluid chambers tampered with in such a way that each time the brakes were depressed, fluid would release in measured amounts until by the time the car reached the most dangerous of several hairpin bends, there was no stopping power and it sailed over a stone wall, hitting the ground 50 feet below in a sickening smash. Everything possible was done by the Committee of 300 operatives to conceal the truth about the murder of Princess Grace. To this day, the Rover car remains in the custody of French police, shrouded under cover on a trailer which no one is allowed to approach, let alone examine. You see, the signal for the execution of Princess Grace was picked up by the British Army listening post in Cyprus. It is believed by well-placed sources that the Committee of Monte Carlo and P2 gave the order. The drug trade, controlled by the Committee of 300, is a crime against humanity, but having been conditioned and softened up by years of incessant bombardment by the Tavistock Institute, we have more or less accepted our changed environment regarding the drug trade as a problem that is too big to handle. This is not the case. If we could marshal an entire nation, equip and send millions of American soldiers to fight a war in Europe in which we had no business intervening, if we could defend a major power, then we can smash the drug trade using the same World War II tactics. The logistic problem that is to be solved when we enter the Second World War are even today still mind-boggling. Yet we successfully overcame all problems. Why is it impossible to defeat a well-defined enemy, or smaller or weaker than Germany, given the immeasurably improved weapons and surveillance equipment we have today? The real reason is that the drug problem is not eradicated because it is being run by the highest families in the entire world as part of the coordinated, gigantic money-making machine. In 1930, British capital invested in South Americans greatly exceeded capital investment in British dominions. Graham, an authority on British investment abroad, stated that British investment in South America exceeded £1 trillion. Remember, this was in 1930, and £1 trillion was a lot of money in those days. What was the reason for such heavy investment in South America? In a word, it was drugs. The plutocracy controlling British banks held the purse strings and then has now put up a most respectable facade to cover their true business. No one ever caught them with dirty hands. They always had front men, even as they do today, willing to take the blame if things went wrong. Then as now, the connection with the drug trade was tedious at best. No one was ever able to lay a finger on the respectable and noble bankers' families of Britain, whose members are on the Committee of 300. There's a great significance that only 15 members of Parliament were the controllers of that vast empire, which the Most prominent were Sir Charles Barry and the Chamberlain family. These overlords of finance were busy in places like Argentina, Jamaica, and Trinidad, which became big money spenders for them through the drug trade. In these countries, British bureaucrats kept the locals as they were contemporaries called at bare subsistence levels, hardly above slavery. The fortunes extracted from drug trade in the Caribbean were vast. The poorer class had hid behind faces like Trinidad Leasehold Limited, but the real meat then as now was drugs. This is true today, where we find that Jamaica's gross national product, that is GNP, is made up almost entirely of sale of ganja, Ganja, a very potent form of marijuana. The mechanism for handling this ganja trade was set up by David Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger under the title Caribbean Basic Initiative. Holy shit. Up until a relatively short time ago, the true history of the China opium trade was quite unknown, having been as well covered up as it's possible to do. Many of my former students in the days when I was lecturing would come and ask me why the Chinese were so fond of smoking opium. They were puzzled, as many are today, over contradictory accounts of what had actually taken place in China. Most thought it was merely a case of the Chinese working buying opium on an opium market and smoking it, or going to some of the thousands of opium dens and forgetting their terrible existence for a while. And I'm going to have to continue. I'm going to have to stop at this point. It's getting late, so it's been a little over an hour here. I want to share this with you guys. Again, this is a work by John Coleman, Committee of 300. That is Dr. John Coleman, and talking about what we call what they've done to this country, how they destroyed this country from within, and using what we call shocks to gradually soften people that they don't even fight anymore or stand up against evil. So we'll do this another day. And thank you for being here. I hope that what I'm sharing will get you to understand how you've been completely blown away or completely brainwashed, I should say. Have a good night. Take care.